Πάμε.
Okay, thank you. Good evening again to all of you. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Yannis Stathatos and to Kythera Green for inviting me to deliver the lecture that will follow. Secondly, thank you all for joining me tonight to listen to a few things about the archaeology of Kythera and the research conducted on the island over the last few centuries, not decades. As you can understand, it is impossible to include everything about the archaeology of the island in about 30 minutes, but I will mainly refer to various landmarks of Kythera's past. So let's start with the geographical position of the island. Kythera's strategic location on the route of every commercial or military activity throughout the centuries has inevitably influenced its history. The island is situated between southern mainland Greece and the largest Greek island, Crete. It guards the entrance to the Greek archipelago and is on the main route for those traveling from the east to the west and vice versa, as well as from the Black Sea to the Adriatic. As such, pilgrims traveling from any part of Europe to the Holy Land had to pass through Kythera. Many medieval travelers' accounts testify to this argument. Since some of the earlier mentioned travelers also stopped at Kythera, they provide some evidence about its antiquities. It is important to note that Kythera is mentioned in narrative portolans, that is, sea charts of the medieval period, and in isolaria, that is, maps of a single island or groups of islands of the later medieval period. The earliest portolan that mentions Kythera is that of Pisa, the city of Pisa in Italy, and dates back to the 12th century, while the earliest pilgrim visiting the island was an Irishman called Simeon Simeonis in 1323. Many others, pilgrims, noblemen, monks, and various adventurers, either visited the island and published their memoirs or passed by the island and narrated either facts that never happened, that is imaginary, or they just repeated what previous travelers had reported. The most common repetition, however, is the myth of Helen of Troy and Paris, who supposedly, on their journey to Troy, called at Kythera. Early archaeology from Paleolithic to late Roman times. Taking the myth of Helen and Paris as a starting point, I may go even further back to the prehistoric period, actually to the Stone Age, and to the very early and primitive human activity on the island. So far, we have been informed that the earliest human habitation at Kythera may have occurred around 10,000 years before the present era, perhaps by seasonal hunters crossing the channel from southern Peloponnese. Stone tools found in Paleopolis support this argument. The first solid evidence of permanent human activity has been attested in the caves of Husti at Diakofti. Here we can see the cave from inside with the well-known archaeologist Aris Tsaravopoulos, and Hagia Sophia at Kalamos around 4000 BC, that is in the Neolithic period. Some of these early finds are exhibited in the small archaeological museum in Hora. Settlers now know how to cultivate the land and perhaps cover quite long distances around their permanent habitation for hunting and collecting crops. However, new evidence brought to light by Archaeologopoulos again pushes back the non-permanent human activity on the island to around 100 years before the present era. The new finds have not been thoroughly studied so far, and for this reason, the date mentioned is provisional and may change to around 40,000 to 50,000 years before the present. 2 millennia later, new archaeological evidence appears at Kastri, again in the Paleopolis area. Broken pottery found on the promontory shows that Kythera has become a significant port of call for sea travelers in the Aegean and from the Peloponnese to Crete. Again, some exhibits at the Hora Museum are dated to around 2800 and later. Nevertheless, the most important development that happened on the island is the arrival of the Minoans a few years after 2000 BC. They settled the eastern coast of Kythera on the same promontory called Kastri and also established a sanctuary on the mountain above Avlemonas, today known as Agios Georgios στο βουνό. From that point on, the island was developed into a vital port of call for the Minoan thalassocracy. The Minoan colony became populous and prosperous. Laconian raw materials such as marble and copper were transported to Crete and perhaps to the rest of the Minoan colonies in the Aegean Sea. The peak sanctuary at the top of the mountain was not only used for religious purposes, but also as a watch center for every boat traveling around Kythera and as far as the islands of Milos, Crete, and Cape Maleas and Cape Matapan or Teneron. In addition, the sanctuary was used as a propaganda center to serve and support the policies of the Minoan civilization. Here we can see the Kastri promontory, and at the back we can see the Limni beach, as it is called. The large number of figurines made of bronze that have been discovered at the Peak Sanctuary testify to this importance of the site. The Minoan colony at Kythera must have stayed active until around 1450 BC, but other Minoan minor settlements like Lyoni, outside Hora, may have lived for another 100 years. We should keep in mind that around 1450 BC, most of the palaces in Crete were destroyed by the tsunami caused by the disastrous volcanic eruption in Thera, Santorini. The main question that arises is why the main Minoan settlement was established in the present-day Paleopolis. Because the area was flat enough and fertile, it had plenty of running water, the beach probably was as smooth as it is today, there was plenty of space to construct a port, the bay was fairly protected from the strong blowing winds from the north, and equally important was the fact that they could have direct visual contact with Crete, especially when the horizon was clear enough. Here we can see one of the of several figurines found in the Peak Sanctuary. And this is the most important figure because shows a man with his hand on the forehead protecting his eyes. According to Professor Sakelarakis, this figurine wants to signify that the person visiting the sanctuary and devoting this offering to the unknown goddess perhaps wanted to protect his eyes from the bright light that the goddess emptied it uh, to the visitors, to the pilgrims. Before I refer to the next period, I would like to make it clear that impressive archaeological remains, such as buildings or even foundations, have not been discovered except for graves and scattered, mainly broken pottery. The Peak Sanctuary, no matter how important it was, must not have been a construction that would have attracted the interest of the visitors, but we understand that many people, sailors, merchants, and others, would have walked to the top of the mountain to offer something to the unknown to us goddess, most likely a goddess of fertility. At the same time, the settlement at Paleopolis continued to flourish until the end of 1400s. In 1450 before Christ, a few decades before the collapse of the Minoan civilization, the first Greek settlers from Mycenae arrived on Kythera. They settled again in the area of Paleopolis as well as the rest of the island, establishing small villages and farmsteads dominating the whole island. Life seems to have continued peacefully without any fundamental changes for more than a century. The archaeological information does not allow us to clarify the developments in detail. Kythera participated in the Trojan War and is mentioned by Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey. It is not well known what exactly goes on at the island in the period between 1200 to 800 before Christ, a period called the Iron Age due to the extensive use of iron instead of bronze. There is a slight possibility that for a short period of time, Phoenician merchants used the island as a port of call and introduced the cult of celestial Aphrodite, whose temple has not been found yet. The fact that no Phoenician remains have been found so far makes it tempting to believe that they only stayed temporarily on the island. There is a possibility that the ruins of the temple lie somewhere at the bottom of the sea in the area of Paleopolis, covered with tons of sand, or all its pieces of sandstone have been stripped off down to and including its foundations. Around the year 800 BC, an elongated orthogonal sanctuary was erected at the top of Paleocastro, and from the small finds uncovered during the excavation, it becomes clear that the island had not lost its importance for the sea trade, because several offerings from the worshippers come from the outside world. In the Archaic period and in the 7th century, the island may have been under the rule of the city of Argos, but very soon Sparta took control of the island. By that time, the settlement of Paleokastro was established and flourished, especially in the 5th, 4th and following centuries. Kythera became a vital stronghold for Sparta and a strategic space for her defense, because the island controlled the entrance to the Laconian Gulf and the route to Githyon, the main port of Sparta. For the rest of the period and until the middle of the 5th century BC, Sparta kept the island without any intervals. We can see here some of the findings from the Paleopolis area, the first, and the other below from the area of Dokana in the middle of the island. The cult of Laconian deities was introduced, like that of the Dioscuri, the twin brothers of Helen of Troy, their names being Castor and Pollux, or Polydeuces. The first one was mortal and the second was immortal because he was the son of Zeus. In 456 before Christ, the Athenians attacked Kythera and managed to conquer it. Soon after, using the island as a base, they attacked Githyon and set part of the Spartan naval base on fire. The fierce struggle between the two strong city-states of Greece for dominance of the rest of the Greek world ended up with the Peloponnesian War, during which the Athenians got hold of Kythera in the year 424 before Christ, and they kept it until 421. Due to the signing of the Nicaea's peace treaty, the island was given back to Sparta. The Spartan rule continued for about half a century until 393 before Christ, when the Athenians, with the help of the Persian fleet, reconquered Kythera, but again the island was so close to Sparta that the weak Athenian state was not able to keep it for long. So in 387 the island passed again to Sparta. The continuous civil wars among the southern Greek city-states allowed Philip of Macedon to interfere in their affairs, bringing peace and prosperity to them. The sources remain silent regarding Kythera, and we don't know how life was on the island. In the period of Alexander the Great and his successor, that is in the Hellenistic period, Kythera may have suffered by piratic attacks, if not earlier, because the small island of Antikythera, or Aegila as it was called in ancient times, was used as a piratic base. Various exhibits of the period are on display at the Hora Museum again. 10 years after the sea battle at Actium between Octavian Augustus and Mark Antony and the triumph of Octavian, Kythera was given as a gift by the Roman emperor to a Spartan nobleman called Eurycles. The reason was that Eurycles took the side of Augustus at the decisive sea battle at Actium. The island remained in the hands of Eurycles' family for nearly a century and a half, and around 137 AD, another emperor, Hadrian, handed over Kythera to the autonomous city of Sparta. Many finds from that long period marble sculpture, pottery, and metalwork found in Paleopolis and in other parts of Kythera are also exhibited at the Hora Museum. During the same period, the local population did not only live in Paleopolis and Paleokastro, but in a large number of settlements and hamlets, perhaps the most important being that at Gonia, very near to the present village of Mitata. A few rock-cut tombs still survive in the area, as well as in the area of Vothonas at Paleopolis. Now we change period, and I'm going to refer to the period from the early Christian to the 20th century. Before we refer to the early Christian, Byzantine, Venetian, and British times, it is worth mentioning that the only visible archaeological remains worth seeing belong to these particular periods. Parts of an impressive early Christian basilica still stand at Paleopolis, incorporated into the modern church of Agios Panteleimon. Two early mosaic floors can still be seen in the church of Agios Georgios στο Βουνό and in the small Byzantine collection at Kato Livadi. The last mosaic has been removed by the Archaeological Service from the ruined chapel of Agios Ioannis o Πρόδρομος beside the cemetery of Potamos. It is evident that the above areas were inhabited during those times, and most probably they were rich enough to build large churches and decorate various buildings with expensive and elaborate floor mosaics. The area of Agios Georgios στο Βουνό was continuously inhabited since the 6th century AD until the 10th century. Sometime in the same century or in the 11th century, part of the population moved to the Paleopolis plains, constructed houses, dug tombs, and organized their lives, having close contacts with the capital, Constantinople. Fine quality broken pottery has been found at Vounno and Paleopolis, imported from the capital and other areas, clearly proving that Kythera was not isolated but in contact with the outer world, even during the Arab expansion from the late 7th until the century until the first decades of the 10th century. Here we can see a fine wall painting from the church of Agios Andreas at Livadi, which has been dated to the late 10th century. This is a clear indication that Livadi at that time was at least a small settlement, and perhaps rich people lived there to finance such a fine quality wall painting. In the Middle Byzantine period, other areas were also flourishing, such as Βύθουλας, Ποταμός, Αρονιάδικα, Αμούτσες, Γεωργάδικα, near the modern village of Perlegianica, Tholaria, near the airport, and many other places. One should not forget that Paleochora, the Byzantine capital of Kythera and the seat of the local bishop, flourished in the Middle Byzantine period until perhaps well into the 17th century, despite the widespread tradition that it was abandoned after the attack of Barbarossa in 1537. On this slide we can see a very special type of a dome church called Kytherian type, which has developed only at Kythera. There are about 10 churches of this type, and one of them is Agios Dimitrios at Kabianica, and they all belong to the 10th or to the 11th century. The large number of the Byzantine churches scattered all over the island, dating from the late 10th until the 15th, as well as those that were built in later centuries, indicate that the island, especially in the 13th and the 14th centuries, had a population big enough to justify the construction of new churches and adorn them with fine quality frescoes. Not all artists were local, but at least some of them came from the Peloponnese, with which Kythera was in close contact, especially with the rich and highly commercialized city of Monemvasia. In the church of Agios Georgios at Krotiria, near Perleganica, and very close to the west coast of the island, an important inscription dated with accuracy to 1275 informs us that the bishopric of Kythera was under the Metropolitan Bishop of Monemvasia, emphasizing the very close relations between the two areas. In the Venetian period, which starts in 1238 or 1250, the local population continued to live according to the Byzantine traditions, and the Venetian culture started to penetrate into the island very slowly and mainly after the end of the 14th century without achieving dominance. From the late 14th century onwards, the island suffered heavily from piracy because the Venetian authorities were unable to defend the island effectively. There are examples of corrupted Venetian officials who suppressed the locals and exploited them badly using their power. During that period, very few public works were undertaken, but we can recognize the foreign influence from various examples in architecture. The most obvious ones are the defensive works in Hora, Kato Hora of Milopotamos, and the castle of Avlemonas. Of course, there are many Venetian elements in domestic architecture, such as chimneys, door frames, etc. Another field where the Venetian influence is present to a certain extent is the everyday vocabulary used by the locals, in which several foreign words are integrated into the local dialect. Here we can see the church of Agios Antonios at Paleochora, showing the Venetian influence on the architecture of the island. We can see the door frame, which has got a flamboyant arch. A more clear, I would say, example is this one from Agios Nikolaos north of Potamos. The years of French occupation, that is from 1799 to 1800s and from 1807 to 1809, have not left a single archaeological or architectural piece of evidence, and they are therefore omitted from this review. The arrival of the British in 1809 signaled the beginning of a long series of public works based on forced labor, where the local men were obligated to work for 3 days a month, that is 1 day every 10 days. Bridges, water tanks, open markets, roads, and primary schools were built under the supervision of the local British governor John MacPhail, who ruled the island until 1830. Unfortunately, after his replacement, the public works intensive program stopped and only minor works were undertaken until the end of the British rule in 1864, when Kythera, together with the rest of the Ionian Islands, joined the modern Greek state. After the union with Greece, Kythera experienced several large waves of migration, especially between the 1890s until 1910s. The main destination was the United States of America, whereas between the 1920s and the 1930s, people left for the Australian continent. This was repeated after World War II, with Kytherians leaving the island between 1950 to 1975 for Australia, Athens, and Piraeus. Kythera was one of the first parts of Greece that were freed from the grasp of the Third Reich on the 4th of September 1944, when the German troops left the island to regroup on the mainland. 10 days later, the Allied forces landed on the port of Kapsali, signaling a new period for Kythera and Greece as a whole. Here we can see a photograph published by John Stathatos in the album that he published a few years earlier, showing the second squadron of the Greek Sacred Battalion, that is Ieros Lochos, arriving from the Middle East at Kapsali on the 24th of September 1944. So far, I have tried to give an outline of the history of Kythera from the very early years of human habitation on the island up to 1864, with reference to archaeology when it was necessary. I will continue referring to major archaeological events until the Second World War. The Florentine priest Cristoforo Buondelmonti visited Kythera around 1413 and 1416 and records a piece of sculpture depicting Aphrodite with the three graces, but even more importantly, he makes a reference to the temple of Aphrodite, which according to him was still visible. The geographer Nicholas de Nicolai visited the island in 1551 and went up to Agios Georgios to Vounό. He also describes some rock-cut structures in Paleopolis area. The Flemish geographer Olfert Dieper visited Kythera in the last years of the 16th century and refers to Kapsali, Avlemonas, Kastri and Paleokastro, but his main contribution is the information about Kytherian coins. In early September of 1802, Mentor, Lord Elgin's brig carrying the Parthenon marbles was shipwrecked near the port of Avlemonas. The marbles were retrieved from the bottom of the sea under the supervision of the British Council, and in 1804 were loaded onto another boat to carry them to England. In 1900, just outside the small island of Antikythera, sponge divers from the island of Symi uncovered a Roman period shipwreck in which the mechanism of Antikythera was found a year later by the Greek Archaeological Service in the first ever underwater excavation of that times. In 1931-1932, the American archaeologist Sylvia Benton was the first to realize that the area of Castria at Paleopolis was an important Minoan colony. This realization helped Nicholas Coldstream and George Leonard Hasley, organized the large excavation at Paleopolis during 1963 to 1965. And I would end this reference to major events with the name of Lazaridis, who was a Greek archaeologist and visited Kythera in early 1960s, and he recorded for the first time the large number of the Byzantine and post-Byzantine churches of Kythera. In conclusion, I would like to stress that the written sources have not been very informative regarding the history of Kythera. In the last few decades, it was the archaeological research that added new pages to the local history and clarified some misunderstandings that had persisted for many decades, filling in many gaps in the continuity of Kytherian history. Great surface surveys that have been conducted by the British School at Athens and the Australian Archaeological Institute will undoubtedly deepen our understanding of Kythera's past from the prehistoric times until the modern era. We are waiting for these publications and we are anxious to see what new information will bring to us. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that I clarified a few things that you didn't know, or if you want to ask a few questions, I'm here to try to solve your questions again. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. I think Pia, you have a question.
No, I just clapped. I just applauded. I just said thank you.
Thank you very much for staying all along the lecture. I hope that you learned something more from what you already knew. And again, if you have any questions, I will be very pleased to answer.
Thank you very much. Donata?
We had one question
This is
before.
Yes.
Thank you very much for
Was from
nice.
Alex to know if the scale of early settlements, whether it was tens or hundreds of people.
We don't know, because if we don't have a full excavation, which is almost impossible, we cannot count the number of the people. Except that we know very well that in the same settlement there were people lived for many centuries. So in the same, let's say, buildings, many generations lived, renovated houses, added new rooms, and it's almost impossible to answer how many people lived in a certain settlement. And in any case, we can count the density of the broken pottery that is found on the surface of the ground, and we can, with a certain degree of certainty, I would say, we can estimate populations, but we cannot say that in this village or in this small town or in this hamlet lived 20, 30, 50 people. We can say around 100 to 200, but we cannot say something more.
Dean, do you want to handle the questions?
Yes, may I ask a question?
Yes?
May I? Yes. Okay. So, first of all, thank you very much for your very nice talk.
You are very welcome.
I was asking myself if I understood well, after 1261, when the Latin Empire fell, Kythera was already under Venetian rules and remained under Venetian rule.
Look, you know perhaps very well that in 1204, Constantinople fell to the Crusaders.
Yes.
And gradually, parts of the Greek lands and other places of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, were conquered by noblemen from the West. Kythera remained under Greek hands until 1238 or 1250. There is two different views about the dates. The well-known late professor Chryssa Maltesou has published a paper supporting the view that the island passed into the Western hands in 1238. Marina Koumanoudi, a student of Chryssa Maltesou, supports the view that the island passed to Western hands in 1250. Until we find something more convincing, we have to mention these two dates. And in any case, Kythera remained in one way or another until indirect Greek control until 1363, because it was not just, it did not become part of the Venetian Republic, but it became a possession of a noble Venetian family who lived in Crete. That is the family of Venier. Venier lived in Crete, having large estates there, and only temporarily visited Kythera. So Kythera actually was left without any important supervision from Venetian powers. Okay, and only the castle of Chora was under direct Venetian control, and the small garrison which was there did not have the power and the means to supervise or to rule the rest of the island. So there was a kind of an autonomy to the rest of the island, and people had to support themselves and defend themselves from the piratic attacks. It was a very difficult situation, and we may say that Kythera had two main cities or towns. One was Chora, under Venetian control, and the other was Agios Dimitrios, present-day Paleochora, who was under Greek control, or in brackets under Byzantine control, or under Monemvasiot control, because it had very close relations with Monemvasia. Monemvasia was very strong those times, and it was a place where many ships called almost every day. It was a trading center. And for this reason, the last centuries of the Byzantine Empire became a very important city, and it was granted various privileges from the emperor in Constantinople.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome. Thank you.
Pat, I have a question, but I can't find the little hand symbol.
Never
That's
mind.
right. We see
I
your
can see
hand.
you on the screen.
Okay. So thank you very much
Thank you
for that very
James.
concise but exact account of so many centuries of history. I just wanted to clear one question. You dismissed the possibility of a Phoenician settlement rather briskly. Now, weren't they associated with the trade in porphyry color using murex shells
Yes.
in the area of Paidopoli? And presumably that also we know that there was certainly some kind of commercial activity involved with the Phoenician presence. Would you say that it was just a minor event in the history of the island, or that the Phoenician presence was actually important enough?
This is a point which needs more clarification. In my opinion, although I'm not a specialist in the prehistoric period of Kythera, in my opinion, the Phoenician presence was constrained only to the small area of Paleopolis and not to the rest of the island, because the Phoenicians were tradesmen, were not people who would go to a place to establish a colony. Only a small commercial center as a port of call and nothing more. This is my view, and the fact that no Phoenician elements have been found anywhere at Kythera makes me to rather believe this view than that Phoenicians were present and more active on the island. Of course, Herodotus mentions the Phoenicians, but the rest of the ancient authors do not say anything about it. For me, this is an indication that Phoenician presence was minimal.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct about that, because we know that the Phoenicians, as a rule, did not colonize. They were
Yes.
purely interested in mercantile activity.
Yes, yes.
But they have become very associated, at least in the public mind, with
Yes.
the prehistory of the island.
That's true. That's true. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
They built the castle in Hora. Who built the castle in Hora?
The castle in Hora was actually, there is, if you have visited the castle, you have seen a rectangular tower at the very top of the castle. This tower was built sometime in the early 13th century. That is in the period that Kythera had not passed to Venetian hands. And the Venetian started most probably to build the castle at Hora in the 14th century, perhaps in the late 14th century. We know that there was a church, a small church, now semi-ruined, at the area of Mesavurgo, which has got frescoes dated precisely on the 1400s. We don't have any other early signs of Venetian presence at Hora. So perhaps the Venetians started to build the castle in the late 14th century, and the castle was completed in 1503. Of course, such a big project lasted, its construction lasted for many decades and underwent many additions and renovations. This is always the case in castle. So we know when the castle was completed, but we don't know when its construction started. Perhaps sometime in the future we may find a document in the Venetian archives which are very rich, and there is a lot of material to be studied in the future. And from a document we may find even the exact date that the construction of the castle started.
Okay. Would they have used their people from Creta to build it, or they used the locals? It must have taken an awful lot of people to do that.
It's something that we don't know. Perhaps they brought civil engineers from Crete or from Venice, directly from Venice, to supervise the project, and they used locals or labor force from Crete. We don't know. It's something, I would say it's a detail that we don't know. And it is, I don't think that it is important to know whether there were local or from Crete the people who built the castle.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
That builds up some more information. Well done.
But of course, I must clarify here something, that all you know, this stone paved path leading to the entrance of the castle. You must keep in your mind that this path never existed. It's a development of the 20th century. Before, in the front of the castle and before the entrance, there was a ditch dug and not a path, because it would have been very easy to the enemy to reach the castle otherwise.
A question from Pat and a question from Alex.
Yes. I've always been struck in any area that I have walked in Kythera, no matter how far away from what I think is current civilization, I have always found pieces of pottery, sometimes of different periods. Now that I've learned to identify a little bit, Byzantine, some Mycenaean, I believe, but modern. It's hard to tell what is what, but it seems to be no matter where on the island. And I was just wondering whether that's an indication of how poverty-stricken the island was and how much had to be cultivated, or whether whether it is actually an indication of a larger population than I would believe.
I have a feeling that there is something wrong about the population in the Middle Ages. Most of the historians believe that the population was very small.
Not true.
Please let me doubt about this belief. I have a feeling that the population was larger. I cannot count the people who lived on the island, but the island was large enough to have a population in the Middle Ages of about 4,000 to 5,000 people. I don't think that that the population was very small, for example, after the sack of Paleochora, as some people believe. I don't believe that there were 500 people in the middle of the 16th century. And I don't believe that people were concentrated only in 3-4 settlements. In those days, and also in the far past, that is in the Mycenaean period, in later in the Archaic period and so on, there were many farmsteads. There were families, extended families, living in certain places. Let's say one family at Potamos, as an example, and another family at Trefilianica. So I mentioned these two villages just to show the distances between the farmsteads. So these people not only cultivated the land around their place, around the place that they lived, but also they moved further away to cultivate places which were very near to running water. For this reason, valleys were extensively cultivated throughout the ages, not only in the 19th and the 20th century, but many ages, many centuries before. And for this reason, Paleopolis was so much inhabited since the prehistoric period until today, I would say, because it was a place where the Paleopolis River in the past had water throughout the year, 12 months of the year. You see, it is the last few decades, a couple of decades, that the Paleopolis River did not have water in the summer. In my childhood, I remember very well that in the summer there was running water in the Paleopolis River.
Yes.
Is there a
Yeah.
reason why they didn't do Neromilos through Paleopoli and only on the outskirts of Kythera?
Water mills are many more than windmills at Kythera. Perhaps you know that.
No.
There are about 50 water mills recorded on the island, while there are only 15 to 17 windmills on the island in ruin. At Paleopolis River, because it was a large river, the water did not come down, let's say, giving too much power to the water mills. For this reason, we have water mills in other very narrow valleys, like Milopotamos, like Ocheles in the northwest of the island. Because to move the rounded stones of the water mill, it's necessary to have strong power, and this comes either from a built channel beside the bottom of the river, so the water is redirected to a special channel, or they preferred to build water mills in narrow valleys. So the amount of water would have very small space to move, to run from upper to lower places.
I just wanted to say, Mr. Koukoulis, that last week at the British School of Athens gave a talk in London, and they were discussing the landscape of classical and pre-classical Greece. And it happens that 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, the weather patterns were much, much wetter than they are now. It was actually fairly lush. And that keys in with what you've just been saying about water mills and also about the population on the island.
In the Middle Ages as well, we have what we call the small ice age. The weather was much cooler, and most probably we had much more rain. So this means that the land must have been more fertile, having more water. Okay, and also we can see that many villages were built beside valleys which had plenty of running water. The village of Potamos, which became a small town by the end of the 18th century, had a river, okay? For this reason took its name Potamos, river. And the river crossed the village. I mean the river which is beside the present day building of Old People Hospital, Γυροκομείο, and the British period bridge. There was plenty of running water there in the past. And we must always keep in mind that people would not live here if
water.
if they didn't have enough water.
Yeah.
If you think that in the 19th century, in 1963, the population of Kythera was roughly 15,000, this it's a clear indication that they had enough water to cultivate, to water their gardens, their orchards, and also to feed their families.
Alex Martin, I think you had one question.
Yes, I mean, it's so interesting what you're saying about water that I feel my question's rather irrelevant, but I was just curious about Paleokastro above Paleopoli.
Yes,
I know that I believe that Schliemann came to look for the temple of
yes.
Aphrodite there. Would you like to say something about what the function of that place was?
Paleokastro worked as a capital of Kythera for nearly 1,000 years,
Okay.
from the 7th century before Christ until the 6th century after Christ. It was a place well defended, away from the sea, that is, could defend the area from any piratic attack. It was not exposed to an immediate danger. Sorry. They had the time to prepare themselves if they could see boats, ships arriving in the island. And for this reason, became so important, and people inhabited the place for nearly 1,000 years.
Wow.
Okay.
But it's not excavated.
It is not excavated. You see, an excavation requires a lot of money.
Yeah.
If you don't have some, let's say, institution funding an excavation with a large amount of money, you cannot excavate.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of people working there, apart uh, from the people who work there, you need also transportation. Uh, you need special photographer. Now you need a specialist who uses drones, and you need a group of specialists, not only archaeologists. Now you require chemists, you require paleoanthropologists, and many other specialities that now who is going to give them, to provide the money for such a large group to do the work, to do the job? For this reason now, we concentrate on surface surveys, which does not require a lot of money and gives you a quite clear idea of what was happening in the past. And of course, you think that sometime in the future, either yourself that you conducted the surface survey or somebody else would do at least a trial excavation. A trial means just a very short excavation, 2 meters by 1, in 3 different places in a large area, to see if you are lucky, if something more and more important is found after the trial excavation. And if you are lucky enough and you find something very important, then you may be even luckier to find somebody to fund you to continue the excavation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember talking to George Huxley about the funding of his dig in Paleopoli in 1960, and that happened because he met members of the family who owned the rights to Pyrex glass,
Yes.
American money, and he said, you know, let's be grateful to our American friends.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe we need one of these billionaires from Silicon Valley to come.
On holiday. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you very much. Great talk. Brilliant.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I have a question from Pat about the border of Dokana, but I'm
Pat
not sure in
Mortain,
what
that is.
regard.
Yes. I please tell me. What you exactly want to know about Dokana?
I'm not sure, Pat.
No, this is Pat Mortain, not me.
Who's that?
Pat Mortain,
Yes?
you have a question about Dokana?
Yes. What is this border in Dokana between north and south?
Well, as far as I know, Dokana, it's not a border. Some people believe that the word Dokana derives from Dogana, the Italian word. But in my opinion, it is a misunderstanding. Dokana is not a border. Nowhere I have found any reference to any border within the area of the island. The only perhaps indication that there was a kind of station there, but not a border, it's the well by the main road. On your way to Chora, from Potamos to Chora, on your left-hand side, there is a well there. And also the two-story building, which has got Venetian influence in its architecture, which served in the 19th century as a hostel a couple of rooms of this building were used as hostel for those people who were going either from the north to the south or from the south to the north, and during their journey, either on foot or on a donkey, they could face a sudden thunderstorm, and they could find a shelter until the thunderstorm would pass.
Okay.
But certainly, so far, I have no any references, written references to any border within the area of Kythera.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Παρακαλώ.
Okay. Are there any other questions or John? Yes.
There's one from Pia Panaratos was the Church of Ios Dimitrios Habyanika. Where is Habyanika in Kythera?
Habyanika is near Karvounades, to the west, northwest.
Right. Thank you.
One from
Habyanika is an important church, together with Purko and Agios Andreas at Livadi and Agios Andreas at Perlegianica. These churches are very important for the local history, and also Agios Georgios at Krotiria, at Perlegianica. You know, the area of Perlegianica in the Byzantine period and later must have been a quite densely populated area. Not only from the churches, but also from the pottery found there and certain references in the documents of the later period.
Right. Thank you.
Great. One more
John?
from John, and then
You're muted, John.
Okay, no, this is just a very brief response to the Lokana question. As far as we know, the Venetians never established internal trade barriers, either on Kythera or in Crete. It's almost certain that the name comes from the Greek word dokana, which means a trap.
Yes.
The very simple classic trap, which consists of a slab of stone supported by a stick with a bit of bait tied to the stick. And I've seen those traps actually being used about 30 years ago when I first came to Kythera. So I don't think there's certainly no question of a connection with Dogana. And I think the solution is very simple. It became known for for the people putting traps around their fields. And that was probably a granary area anyway. So they had good reason to want to get rid of mice and rats.
Yes. Array, for example, was a densely cultivated area in the past. Now it's abandoned everywhere.
Well, I have to say this was a brilliant evening, and your talk was just wonderful. And the questions were really good too. So thank you so much for this. It's really a treat. It makes Kythera feel very living. There's a lot of continuity going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much too for your invitation, and thank you very much for your attention. And of course, I must thank you for your work as Kythera Green that you offer to the island, because it's a very good job, and I wish that many more people would join you and manage to keep the island as clean as possible and be a kind of a paradigm for the rest of Greece.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was
Thank you
a
very much.
fantastic talk.
Have a nice evening. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Theodoros.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.